Well, I grew up as a drummer, touring musician. Eventually went to law school. Got horribly ripped off as a musician, so I went to law school. I'm now a partner in a law firm called Saxon Gilmore and Caraway, based in Tampa, Florida. And most of my practice involves representing musicians and artists.
You do a lot of work with artists. Why does an artist need an entertainment attorney?
Well, and I get asked that question quite a lot. The truth is the music business is a business, and people forget that it's a business. And it's a business where, despite declining revenue, there are still billions of dollars exchanged every year. Now, like all business, there are the big boys and there are the small boys, and a lot of that depends upon leverage. And all the big boys, whether you're talking about agents, managers, promoters, record labels, they all have lawyers. And everything is done contractually. And so artists, in order to be on an equal footing, need to hire a lawyer. Well, there are a lot of mistakes artists make in negotiating any deals. The largest mistake they make is the law is complex, and industry standards are complex. And sometimes, you just don't know what they are. So people either negotiate from a footing of not knowing what they're really entitled to. So I'll give you an example. I represented a client who had a song placed in a major Hollywood movie. It was not, they're an unsigned act. They had a management deal, but the director really loved the song. The song was not going to have an important place in the movie. It was going to be playing on the radio during a scene set in the kitchen. But this was a major multi-million-dollar film, and they asked me to negotiate the sing rights. As you know, there's a license associated with any time you place music in conjunction with something that's moving, and that's a synchronization license. And that license would go to the owner of the master and to the owner of the copyright. So there's 2 licenses, 2 fees. I asked them what would they like to receive in return for this license. The bass player in the band said to me, well, what's the going rate? And I said, well, for a movie like this, considering your leverage, considering the place of the song in the movie, I would expect we can negotiate anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000, somewhere in that range. And the guitarist who'd written the song said, I want $1 million. I'm not doing it, and I'm not agreeing to it unless you can get me $1 million. And I said, well, we're not doing it then, because they're not giving you $1 million. You have no leverage. He said, why not? They like my song. It's a huge film. Why won't they give me $1 million? Well, they won't give you $1 million because they're businessmen, and they'll just find somebody else if you won't do it. You don't have the leverage to keep it. If it's the against all odds moment, walking down the beach at the end of the movie, negotiate for $1 million, but you're not Phil Collins. So, people make a mistake because they don't know industry standards. People also, frankly, don't understand contractual language. And, if you sign a deal with Sony, or if you sign a deal with Universal, it might be a 60, 70 page, single space, 11-point font contract. And, it puts me to sleep reading it, but I understand what it says. And if you don't, there are certain key words that musicians need to look out for, because those words can change the meaning of the things that came before. There's a great word you should look out for, which is notwithstanding. Notwithstanding will often precede a paragraph, and it will say, notwithstanding anything written above, right here, this is what controls. So I recently had a contract negotiation where the rights given to the label for the music were perpetual, which is standard, because the label wants to be able to re-release and re-release and re-release. Halfway down the paragraph, down the contract, a paragraph was inserted that said, notwithstanding anything written above, all rights on the master shall revert to the artist in 5 years. No, they won't, because we're not going to accept that. So, you need to know what you're looking at. And unfortunately, many contracts are written in language that you have to go to school for 3 years to be able to understand what they say. I think that is a true shame. I think writing in legalese is laziness. And I think a good lawyer should be able to write a contract that anyone can understand when they just read it, and then they know what their obligations are. Another word you need to look out for in a contract is perpetuity, which means perpetually. It means forever and a day. So often you are giving up your rights to something and it will say in perpetuity. And people will think, well, I don't know what that means, so I'll just agree to it. What it means is you're giving up your rights to it forever. And there's a reason why, say for example in sync rights, that the label or the movie or the producer, they want those rights in perpetuity. And that's because if you make a movie today, you don't want to give somebody a 10-year deal. Because in 10 years' time, what if you want to release that movie to cable, to television? If you don't have the rights to do it, you can't release it. So it's in no one's interest. Usually you will give up those rights in perpetuity. But in sync cases, what you'll try and negotiate as the artist is a non-exclusive license. So that they use that song and they have the right to use it in that film for one license fee in perpetuity, but you can also use it too. Well, the other thing every artist should do if they're negotiating a sync right is they should try and separate the rights for the soundtrack from the rights for the film. Because the company doing it will try and give you a block deal whereby you give up the rights to the song in the film and the soundtrack. Keep the soundtrack rights, they can be valuable. Well, you know, I mean, I think knowledge is just the most important thing you can do. The business has changed, right? There was clearly a time when you could afford to have a team around you. Every artist, especially an up-and-coming artist, needs to think about having multiple streams of revenue. So they need to understand how copyright works. They might need to be an engineer. They might need to understand how to write songs. They might need to understand endorsements. But they need to understand all those things to keep stuff coming in. They also need, I'm afraid, to be able to deal with simple contracts. They need to be able to deal with booking. There's not enough money in the business now to pay everybody a percentage to do the stuff for you. And you know what they say is the great thing about being self-employed, and of course you all will be self-employed, all you musicians. The best thing about being self-employed is you get to pick what 90 hours a week you work. You know, life, I know what me now, what I would say to myself as a young, dropping out high school musician, I'd say enjoy the ride a little more. Enjoy the journey instead of looking at the destination. I think I spent too much time worried about how I would get somewhere rather than just enjoying what was going on at the time. And I think I would absolutely tell myself, don't sign anything until you show it to a lawyer. And you know, one of my very first cases that I handled was a case where I was presented with a contract signed by my client that said he owed them a lot of money. My client said, I never signed it. I never signed the contract. So the lawyer on the other side sent me the agreement. I showed it to my client. I said, is that your signature? And he said, yeah, it is, but I never signed that contract. I said, well, you know, are you suggesting that your signature is forged? And he said, no, that's definitely my signature, but I never signed that contract. But I tell you what did happen. I played a show about a month ago where I thought it was really odd that a guy gave me a piece of 8.5, 11 by 11 paper and asked for my autograph. So we took that contract to an expert who evaluated it and managed to work out that the printed contract had been printed over the top of his signature rather than his signature over the top of the contract. So I wish I'd known at 18 that there were people who are that shady in the industry. I do want to say though, I firmly believe the greatest people in the world are in the music industry. The greatest, kindest, most generous, most creative people are in the music world. But not everyone in the music world is great.